The Denver Broncos roster now sits at 80 total players after the Broncos made several roster moves, including releasing a veteran player. Plus, we also take a look, could the Broncos have a starting quarterback announced this week against the Minnesota Vikings? We play that and much more on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos country? Welcome into a brand new episode of Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much to everybody in Broncos country for tuning in, making Locked on Broncos your first listen of the day, every single day on your favorite audio podcasting platform, or whether you watch us on YouTube. Do us a favor, hit that subscribe button or that follow button so you never miss out on a day's worth of Denver Broncos news, content coverage every single day, all year long. From the South Stands to the end zone, I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, Broncos beat reporter from Mile High Sports, joined alongside by my co-host, Sayre, Bedinger, site expert, predominantlyorange.com. Sayre, my friend, I tell you what, Tuesday, the roster cut down date we were all awaiting, and I know that you and I were texting throughout the day on Tuesday. Maybe they'll make a move. Maybe they'll make an announcement before practice. It happened literally right when practice had started officially for the team on Tuesday, but they now sit at 80 total players on this roster and had to make some roster moves, including a veteran option. Plus, there's some rumblings about a starting quarterback this weekend against the Minnesota Vikings. My man, can't wait to break it all down with you.
That's right. I can't wait myself. We got a lot to talk about. I think kind of starting off with a little bit of the surprising news from Tuesday, which is that Joe Schobert, who pretty much I don't even know if the ink is dry on him signing his contract, Cody, but Joe Schobert, the veteran linebacker, the former Pro Bowler, former big money contract linebacker for the Jacksonville Jaguars, he's already been cut by the Broncos. And it just goes to show kind of what you and I talked about off the air for a couple of episodes here. Just do we think Joe Schobert's really going to make the roster? Are the Broncos going to kind of let him cut his teeth and get to know the defense and kind of get back up to speed? Well, no, the answer is no. They're not going to let him do that. They're not going to afford him that time. They're going to let him loose. And I think that, you know what, after what we saw against Buffalo, it's pretty well justified. So I would say he's probably the most surprising name on the initial or the second wave cut list, I suppose, as the Broncos go from 85 to 80 players. And then, of course, they'll go down to 53 next week. So right now, I feel like the timing of this, it's not overly surprising, but because of how big his name is, I feel like Joe Schobert may be the guy that everyone's kind of, hey, I'm kind of surprised to see him on the list already.
Well, and that's the thing, too. And I was talking with several other reporters today at practice, and the thing with Schobert, he definitely seemed a little smaller in person than what I think we're normally accustomed to seeing him. And I'm not sure like what that was, but for him, recently moved to the Colorado area. At this point, Sayre, I know he was released, but don't be surprised if once the regular season rolls around, the Broncos bring him onto the practice squad, right? Because they're able to do that. He's in the area, so he can continue to train and maybe put on, some more muscle, more weight. I think that was one part, and maybe even learn the playbook a little bit, but it definitely was not a surprise initially. You and I talked about this. We even said, hey, Joe Schobert, he actually, in our followers segment this week, he might be on the cut list this week, and certainly that was the case. They also made some other moves as well. Offensive lineman Casey Tucker, who's been playing some center a little bit early on in the week. Last week with the injury to Lloyd Cushenberry and Wattenberg, got some reps there to be able to snap the ball to Russell Wilson last week, but, short-lived, suffered a dislocated big toe on his foot. And I tell you what, like just the sound of a dislocated big toe, that sounds absolutely brutal, but he was placed with a waived/injured designation at this point. So more than likely he'll transition after this to IR, which allows him to be in the entire Broncos building for the entire year if they bring him back. So that I guess that could be a positive sign if they really view Casey Tucker as someone who can do certain things for them in the offensive line, maybe play multiple positions, something to keep an eye on. One that I don't think that we were surprised about, running back Stevie Scott was released as well. And just simply the running back, he or Jaquan Hardy haven't really added much to this Broncos team in the preseason or in training camp, and more so are just camp bodies. But the new running back we talked about yesterday, Sayre, like seeing him in person, he's huge. He's big. He looks athletic. He looks very fast. And he definitely doesn't look like Stevie Scott or Jaquan Hardy and Divine Zigbo. So tell you what, man, they might have something there, but, Stevie Scott there. But there was also two other roster moves the Broncos made to get from 85 to 80 today.
They did. They let go. They waived wide receiver Trey Quinn, the former Mr. Irrelevant of I believe, the 2018 NFL draft, back in the same year as Cortland Sutton came out. They were SMU teammates, and Trey Quinn had a pretty decent game against the Buffalo Bills, at least catching the ball. We know he had the fumble on the kickoff return, but showed some things out there as a receiver and some strong hands. And I think definitely he'll probably get some looks from teams. As at one of the benefits of being part of this wave of cuts is that other teams can bring you on. You can still get another shot in another preseason game. Of course, you're not going to really know the playbook as well or things like that, but you might get another shot. And hey, there's a lot of practice squad spots available as well. So I don't think we've seen the last of Trey Quinn in the NFL by any means. I think he'll get another shot somewhere. And then obviously Tom Compton, the free agent offensive lineman. So for whatever reason, I didn't know this was the case until a couple weeks ago, actually. But apparently, up until Tuesday, players that were on the PUP list actually counted against your 90-man roster. So Tom Compton, who's been on the PUP since he had back surgery earlier this offseason, he's been counting against the 90-man roster. That apparently changed as the roster numbers go down from 85 to 80. So now he's on the reserve PUP list, physically unable to perform list. So Tom Compton no longer counting against the overall roster number, still with the Denver Broncos. As Nathaniel Hackett said early in the week, he's expected to play a role at some point down the line this season. They're looking forward to having him back and healthy. But for now, he won't cost the Broncos a roster spot anymore. So now there's Tom Compton kind of out of that mix for a while here, but he'll be back at some point, and it'll be good to have him. I think the Broncos would be glad to have that depth at the tackle and guard positions, which he's played and started at a variety of spots in the NFL. So that's where the Broncos are at this point, Cody. I think, going down from 85 to 80, I don't know that there was any huge surprise other than maybe Joe Schobert, but definitely good to see the Broncos kind of moving forward and wishing the best for those guys that were let go.
Well, and for Tom Compton, he will be unable to return in the regular season until week 5, that Thursday night football matchup against the Indianapolis Colts, because part of being on the reserve PUP list, once you get moved there at this point of the offseason and training camp, in the preseason as well, you have to miss the first 4 weeks of the NFL regular season. Same thing happened with the Washington Commanders with Chase Young, who's still coming off of the ACL injury he sustained last year. So Tom Compton will be available. And like you mentioned, Coach Hackett thinks that he'll add something to their team when he's back and when he's healthy, which is a good thing there for this Broncos team going forward. Broncos country, we want to know what you think, though. Were there any surprise cuts in your eyes of the 5 roster moves that the Broncos made earlier today at the UCL Training Center? Let us know in the YouTube comment section down below. But coming up here in just a moment, we're going to talk about whether or not the Broncos have decided on a starting quarterback this weekend against the Minnesota Vikings. Will they let it rip, or will Josh Johnson continue to take command of the huddle? We'll get to that coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me tell you about the sponsor of today's episode, Lockdown Broncos. It's our good friends over there at LinkedIn. And as you gear up for fall, you need the right people on your team to help your small business fire on all cylinders. And LinkedIn Jobs is here to make it easier to find the people that you want to talk to faster and for free. Create a free job post in minutes on LinkedIn Jobs to reach your network and beyond to the world's largest professional network of over 810 million people. Then add your job to the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring so that your network can help you find the right people to hire. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates that you want to talk to faster. And did you know every week nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn? Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. The Denver Broncos have a decision to make when it comes to the backup quarterback job ahead of the regular season, but that could be contingent upon week 3 of the NFL preseason. Thank you so much, Broncos country, for tuning in, making Lockdown Broncos your first listen of the day every single day on your favorite audio podcasting platform, or whether you're watching on YouTube. Do us a favor, hit that subscribe or that follow button so you never miss out on a day's worth of Denver Broncos news, content, and coverage. And also make sure you comment on the YouTube videos. We love interacting with Broncos country. It's a great place for you to be open, to have respect hopefully debated topics going on amongst fan bases as well. We appreciate you so much and all the community interaction that we get here, the Lockdown Broncos podcast. Sayre, my friend, there was an interesting report that came out Tuesday right before practice, according to 9 News Mike Kliss. He reported that Brett Rypien will be getting the start here for the Broncos in the preseason finale against the Minnesota Vikings. And interesting enough, the Broncos have not officially confirmed this. They have not said anything on this yet, but Mike Kliss is reporting it, said he sat down with Coach Hackett in an exclusive interview. So it looks like Brett Rypien will be the guy that's probably going to get the start this weekend against Minnesota Vikings. And you and I talked about earlier, the Broncos should do just that.
They should, and I think it's fair to Rypien. It gives him an opportunity to go out there, maybe with KJ Hamler and some of these other guys. We'll see kind of what the Broncos have in store for this final preseason game, but definitely excited for Rypien to get this opportunity. I think after the first game, it kind of felt like Josh Johnson was the guy as QB2, and then after the second game, I think things kind of shifted around a little bit. Yes, the context for both guys is very different in terms of who they're going up against, what level of players they're going up against. But at the same time, I think Brett Rypien really showed some things in that second game, a little more consistency, even than what we saw from Josh Johnson in that first outing. So to me, Cody, this is not just about the quarterback 2 position in Denver. This could be about a 53-man roster position or not. You know, whoever wins this quarterback 2 battle is on the roster. Whoever doesn't isn't, because I think the Broncos, I don't know if they can really afford to keep 3 quarterbacks on the active roster at this point in time with, the potential, as we've talked about in the past, potentially 7 wide receivers. Could we be looking at them keeping 6 edge guys? We think they want to keep 11 defensive backs. So kind of where do you sacrifice here? Where do you have to maybe limit the number of guys that you're keeping around? Do the edge guys factor in with how many defensive linemen you keep? We'll kind of see what the Broncos do, but I think for the time being, it kind of feels like 2 quarterbacks will make this roster and then maybe 1 on the practice squad, but we'll see. There's nothing definitive on that. That's just kind of how it feels based on the rest of the roster. So Brett Rypien could be out there playing for not just QB2, but a 53-man roster spot.
And I do think, regardless of how the roster shakes out, I do think that you have to have at least 3 quarterbacks, whether it be, a couple on your active roster and then 1 on your practice squad, because you're just one situation away. Like, how many times we've seen, I think there's been several instances in the last couple of years where there's been an NFL team, their starting quarterback gets hurt, their backup quarterback gets hurt, and all of a sudden they have to have an emergency guy. Heck, the Broncos were a team years back when they had Chris Sims on the roster alongside Kyle Orton, and Kyle Orton wasn't healthy enough to play, but he was listed as the emergency quarterback, even though he's normally the starter. Chris Sims gets hurt in that game, and I can't remember who else was on the roster. That guy got hurt, and then Kyle Orton had to come in as the emergency guy. Not a good situation to be in. And as we know with the Broncos, just history of like having things come up at quarterback, like a couple years ago, the whole the COVID thing with Drew Lock and everybody. I definitely think they'll have 3 quarterbacks in some facet. But I think you make an interesting point. I mean, do you do that? Do you carry 3 onto your active roster and maybe sacrifice at another position? Or do you believe that you have more value right now at other positions where you need to bring those guys onto the 53 versus releasing them and hoping they clear waivers? I will say this, though. I don't know if the Broncos could bypass Rypien going through waivers, because I do think there are some teams out there that would claim him. Denver did release him last year for a roster move, and there was competition. The Houston Texans wanted to bring him in, but Rypien refused to go to Houston, said, hey, the only way I'm coming back is like in Denver. And so he certainly did that. He loves it in Denver. The coaching staff loves him. And I just think that what we've seen from him overall throughout training camp in the preseason, just a better command of the offense. There's things that Josh Johnson has done really, really well, and especially like delivering throws across the middle of the field. We saw it to Montreal against the Buffalo Bills. We saw the 2 touchdown pass performance against the Dallas Cowboys in week 1 of the preseason. But before that, he got off to a little bit of a sluggish start, and I thought he adjusted really well. This, I think, will be the game, Sayre, in my opinion, that determines who is the backup quarterback for Russell Wilson. Because now Brett Rypien's getting an opportunity to go out there and throw to guys like Brandon Johnson. He's going out there throwing to guys like Jalen Virgil will still get some run there. But even Kendall Hinton being one of those guys, Seth Williams, he's going to have a different offensive line to work with. And now Josh Johnson gets to work with the other side of that as well. So how do they do maybe playing that like Freaky Friday swap and rolls thing? To me, that's what I'm most intrigued to see.
It's going to be really cool to watch. And I think it's either way, it's a great opportunity for these receivers. I think Brett Rypien and Josh Johnson, at times, they've both been really putting the ball on these receivers. So for guys like from top to the bottom, like Darius Shepherd. He's going to get an opportunity with Josh Johnson out there to really show that he belongs as one of the priority guys on the practice squad as well. And I think that's exactly what it's all about, is going out there, putting your best foot forward. And even for Josh Johnson, I think it's important to be mindful of this as we enter this period of roster cuts. Josh Johnson, even though this is his 17th, right, NFL or 17th professional football team that he's played for, he is, believe it or not, he's practice squad eligible. The NFL has kind of readopted the COVID year rules for the practice squad this year. So you can have 16 players and you can have up to 6 guys who are essentially vested veterans or have unlimited NFL experience. It doesn't matter if they played for 5 years or like Josh Johnson. Since I graduated high school in 2008, I still remember reading about him in the ESPN NFL Draft magazine back in 2008, this QB out of San Diego. So Josh Johnson, he's practice squad eligible. I feel like based on what you said exactly, Cody, you'd have a much easier time keeping Brett Rypien on the active roster and putting Josh Johnson on the practice squad, because I don't think anybody's going to he's not even subject to waivers. He's a veteran. So you release him, and when he's released, you can sign him back that next day to the practice squad. So to me, that may be the ideal scenario in terms of keeping that, the roster as we want to open up those spots on the 53. And that could be the ideal way to do it.
Might be. And look, I don't envy George Paton, the personnel department, that, they're going to collaborate with the coaching staff. Some really tough decisions will be made. And, I think I'm going to be very intrigued more so what they do, like at wide receiver and tight end. Do they keep 7 receivers? Do they keep 3 or 4 tight ends? How do they manage that? How do they maneuver positions around? What do they do with some of the extra edge rusher depth that they have? Do they initiate any trades? There's a lot to break down. There's also some news and notes as well that we'll go through following Tuesday's practice at the UCL Training Center, and including a little bit of a scenario that came up with another team in the AFC that could need help at punter, and maybe the Broncos can help them out. We'll dive into that coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me tell you about BetOnline.net, the sponsor of today's episode, Locked On Broncos. BetOnline.net is the fastest and the easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. You can find all your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. You can find reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all your sports wagering information, from live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts. They have you covered. So head to betonline.net today or use your mobile device to learn more about the action that's happening today. BetOnline, where the game starts. As we jump into the fourth quarter action on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, could this Denver Broncos team potentially, Sayre, help out another AFC team, and could it acquire some capital here for George Paton? Thank you once again for making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day, every day. Broncos country, whether you listen on your favorite audio podcasting platform or whether you watch us on YouTube, we appreciate you so much. Sad news out of Indianapolis. I feel like their special teams unit has always been pretty good. Like their kicking and punting situation last year, I thought was one of the best in the National Football League. Rigoberto Sanchez, their punter, the fear is that he tore his Achilles in practice this past week. And I think that's a massive blow to the Indianapolis Colts. And the first thought that I had, I was talking with Andrew Mason. We were bringing it up. Well, hey, you know what? The Broncos have 2 punters. They have a veteran in Sam Martin. It can save the Colts money. It's not going to cost them an arm and a leg. And, oh, yeah, Colts, would you be willing to maybe give up a 6th-round pick to acquire Sam Martin at this point in time? Now, Sam Martin's working his way back from injury, is expected to punt this Saturday, but that could change here. I mean, this could be a great opportunity for George Paton to get on the phone and talk with Ballard and Irsay about, hey, you need some help? We can help you out. Will you give me a 6? Because they did already trade during the NFL draft together. They've already had conversations previously, and it seems like a pretty good relationship between George Paton and, like I said, some other representatives.
Absolutely. We know those phone lines are open. The Colts trading the Broncos a 2023 3rd-round pick, which is one of the Broncos' only 2023 picks. I think they have 5 at this point. So maybe they throw another late-round pick for somebody like Sam Martin or Corliss Waitman. I'll be fascinated to see what happens with that, because the Colts, they're low enough on the waiver priority list that if any other team ahead of them needs a punter and the Broncos send Corliss Waitman to waivers, well, they're not going to get him. So a lot of times you do have to trade for guys, even if it's punters and kickers. We see actually quite a bit around this time of year. We do see punters and kickers getting traded for late round picks. And I think Sam Martin is good enough. He was the top 10 punter last year. If the Broncos wanted to trade him, the Colts don't have a guy. they could probably get a 6th-round pick for him. So it'll be interesting to see what the Colts do. Obviously, the Buffalo Bills, they cut their other punter besides the punt god, Matt Araiza, who we only saw holding for point afters in that preseason game. They cut the other punter. Apparently there was a punting competition there going on, which I had no idea. So we'll kind of see, but I think that's a great idea. I think that the Colts they've helped the Broncos out before, or maybe it was the Giants. I can't remember. Whoever traded the Broncos, Brandon McManus. I know Brandon McManus was with one of those two teams. It might have been the Colts, but at one point or another, you make a trade for a guy because you believe, hey, this guy has the potential to help us out in a big way. And punting is huge in the NFL. Field position, especially when you're changing quarterbacks. You have a quarterback like Matt Ryan coming in, a brand new guy. You want to control field position. You want to pound the ball on the ground with Jonathan Taylor. It makes a lot of sense to me.
I could just tell you this. I will be shocked if Corliss Waitman is the punter that gets waived by Denver. I think he's consistently been better. He adds more of a booming dynamic. He can flip field position. He's got great hang time, and he's been available. And I'd say that there's a lot more potential. Like if you were to compare these two guys, maybe give them a year, I think that Waitman will eventually be the better punter. Martin is a veteran. I think the Colts would benefit from him. I would be very shocked at this point, though, Sayre, if Corliss Waitman is the guy that loses the punter competition battle in Denver. I think that he's won it already, kind of. I think he's been ahead if it's still ongoing, but we'll find out a little bit more throughout this week and maybe going into next week as some of these teams prepare for these massive changes. Denver will have to cut from 80 to 53 following the preseason action against Minnesota Vikings August 30th by 4 o'clock p.m. Eastern time. That's 2 o'clock p.m. Mountain time. But some good news in terms of the injury side of things with some players. Billy Turner was back at practice today, Sayre. Not doing anything in team just yet, but he was working. He was there at the team period. He was working with a teammate, working on pass sets against a pass rusher, just kind of like some one-on-one stuff, just not necessarily like full-on reps, but more so he could work his technique. And yeah, I tell you what, he looked pretty decent. So no setbacks there. Even Nathaniel Hackett said he did not suffer a setback last week. They're continuing to ramp things up with him. And also another guy as well, and that's going to be KJ Hamler and Randy Gregory, players that have returned to practice this week. Randy Gregory looks like he's having fun. He's getting back in there. I mean, he's sizable, Sayre, but he can move for his size too. KJ Hamler, though, not doing a lot of stuff in the open team period, but he's moving and getting some team reps once the Broncos get to the red zone period. Good to see there for KJ Hamler, man. A lot of excitement here in Broncos country for these three players.
It'll be great to have them all back, and it'll be fascinating to see kind of just how they incorporate them back into the mix. If it's going to be, hey, you're going out there, it's time to go. We're going full speed. You're going to be playing 65, 70% of the snaps. I'm pumped to see what they do. I know KJ Hamler, he'll obviously be rotating in. Obviously, the Broncos have Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, Kendall Hinton having a great offseason as well and a great preseason. I mean, he's been one of the stars for me for preseason. So I don't think the Broncos need to rush KJ Hamler. But Randy Gregory, he's your big money free agent acquisition. And he's that guy. He's that dude out there that you're expecting him to easily beat his previous career high of 6 sacks out there. So the Broncos are expecting big things out of him. And I love that. I love that they're getting back. They're easing back into the mix. I love that, just these players coming back from injury. It makes it more exciting going into the season. You feel like you got a fully loaded lineup. We'll miss Tim Patrick, but I think for the most part, things feel really good in terms of you rested your starters. You made the right decision in terms of getting the best roster as you possibly could through training camp, through the preseason. And I got to say this too, Cody. I did double check. It was not the Indianapolis Colts that traded Brandon McManus to the Broncos, although McManus did spend a year with the Indianapolis Colts. So trivia question for anybody who needs to know that. It was the Giants who traded him to Denver, one of the more underrated trades the Broncos have made. So you never know.
There you go. Some trivia here from Sayre Bedinger on today's episode, Lockdown Broncos. Some other good news as well. Lloyd Cushenberry was back at practice for this Broncos team, met with the media. And I tell you what, I've noticed a significant stride in just how he's been this year. So far in camp, he's looked really good. I think him meshing really well with Russell Wilson taking an interest in him and working with him, I think has him in a very good mindset. And he said, it's different when you have a kind of a Super Bowl caliber future Hall of Fame quarterback under center, which he hasn't had that. And I was tempted to ask him, hey, you've had a guy who's been really good like Joe Burrow. What's it like, playing with a future Hall of Famer, MVP caliber type quarterback in Russell Wilson? And obviously, I think just the attention to detail, Lloyd Cushenberry said it's not like a challenge, but it's more like embracing the opportunity to learn as much as you can. So as long as he can stay healthy, I think the Broncos will be in a good position. And, if not, I think they have some plans for maybe how they can mix and match on the offensive line a little bit, but we'll have to wait and see how everything goes. The Broncos will continue to practice this week at the UCLA Training Center in preparation for Saturday's preseason finale against the Minnesota Vikings. Sayre, Bedinger, and myself, we're going to have you covered all week long here, the Locked On Broncos podcast, your favorite podcast provider, or whether you watch us on YouTube. Thank you so much, Broncos Country, tuning in and making us your first listen of the day every single day. Sayre, Bedinger, and myself, we'll be back tomorrow for a brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.